I like shoveling shit, from my horse. I prefer the
Yeah,
smell of the stable. What? Okay.
yeah.
You have these organizations and these facilities and these testing facilities and these standards that were all developed for a dying solution to transportation. Yeah, the car industry is so amazing right now because we're at like a renaissance period. Transitioning away from internal combustion engine vehicles is really a once in a lifetime or once in a multi generation type of transition. And so I'm just happy to be a part of this journey. And I know that your viewers are real interested in the volume versus margin question. And working with Sandy, we run a small business, so we're always trying to guide Munro Associates through periods of growth and also periods of profitability. So if we just were focused only on profitability, we could make all sorts of cuts to our operating expenses. We could trim the staff and batten down the hatches and make a lot of profit. But what would suffer is our ability to grow and innovate. And if you look at Tesla, they've had a rapid period of both growth and margin, and they can play with margin to actually accelerate growth. And when I talk about growth, that's growth in market share and in revenue. So with Tesla, with their price cut strategies, the one thing they're solidifying is they're solidifying their position in the market by getting the vehicles in customers' hands. And I think that's so important because once you get a Tesla in someone's hands, the loyalty is strong and it's very hard for someone to choose a traditional player once you're in. And I think with automobiles moving forward, they'll be so much more tied to the software defined aspects, the software defined vehicles. So um, this is just a crazy period of time in the automotive industry. And I think the next 10 to 20 years are going to be wild. So I agree with the strategy as long as it aligns with the mission of the company. So Tesla's mission is not short-term profitability. And oftentimes other organizations beyond the automotive
Mhm,
industry are focused on quarterly profits,
mhm.
annual profits, because you may have the leadership's bonus or compensation tied to these goals, these sustained quarterly or annual uh, targets. And a company like Tesla, their mission is to transition the world to sustainable energy. Elon has said he's trying to push the envelope in getting the whole world to switch over to electric vehicles and more renewable energy sources. If you look at Tesla investing 7 to 9 billion instead of 5 to 7, that's going to take short-term cash as well as a reduction in margin. That's less profitability. You're going to continue to push vehicles out and invest in building more plants because right now Tesla's only in, I'd say, 3.5 to 4 segments. With the Cybertruck coming on, you'll be in the large truck segment, but they're not in the small truck segment. They're not in the tiny SUV segment. They don't have a wide array of sedans or really, really small compact cars. So, in order for Tesla to hit that 20 million mark by 2030, which would be 25% of global production, they need to offer cars in all segments. And if you're going to offer cars in all segments, you need several more manufacturing plants. So, the announcement of the Mexico plant, and there has to be more plants throughout the world, even if they get them, even with all the advantages they have with how the vehicles are going to be built, that'll only increase the amount of vehicles produced per plant by, I think, about 40 or 50%, based on square cars manufactured per square footage. And ultimately, these are aggressive goals that align with the company's mission. Cost. They've been able to pull out, I think, 30% of the cost of the
Right.
Model 3 since they launched it. And we've seen that. We've seen those improvements
Yes.
because we
Oh,
tore down an original Model 3. As companies produce at scale, if they're willing to innovate at a rapid pace, they can pull that cost out. And they have. So price versus cost is very important because Tesla has been relentlessly attacking their cost structure. So from a software perspective, from a usability perspective, The Model Y and Model 3, they provide tremendous value at that middle price point. And then cost to a lot of people is one of the biggest issues. But in that chart you showed, there was still a significant amount of people that said they prefer a gas engine. And when I look at
Yes.
that, when I
Yeah.
see somebody prefers a gas engine, that is like someone in 1905 saying, I like shoveling shit, from my horse. I
Yeah,
prefer the
yeah.
smell of the stable, versus my, gasoline powered or electric vehicle back in 1910 or 20. And oh my God, why would you prefer the complexity, the noise, and the extreme inefficiency of a gasoline engine? It was like the third or fourth one down. They prefer a gas engine? What? Okay. So
Yeah.
moving past that, the OEMs who make gas internal combustion engine vehicles right now, they're really struggling with the decision to transition all their efforts into EVs because the profitability isn't there the way that their businesses are set up. You're looking at 180,000 employees at General Motors. Thousands, probably 10, 20,000 engineers are transmission and emissions calibrators. I know a lot of people who work at General Motors, and that's what they do. So now those people need to transition to calibration efforts on what? The thermal systems and drivelines of EVs. But frankly, the complexity of an electric vehicle drops dramatically because there's much less vibration, there's less heat loss, there's less noise. So many of the complex problems that have been solved and cared for over the past 3 decades are eliminated because you have an electric motor that doesn't vibrate. It doesn't violently shake. It doesn't get hot, or it gets
Mm.
hot. It doesn't get very hot. And because of that, you have these organizations and these facilities and these testing facilities and these standards that were all developed for a dying solution to transportation. Well, if you're a traditional OEM, now you're not the cost leader. The Tesla's the cost leader, and the Tesla has all the cachet and the street cred, and people want Teslas, and they don't even have to market, and they can still make margin at that $49,000 number and increase their market share and retain their lead in the EV space. It's a whole different story when you're talking about China. You just have to kind of shake your head when you look at China because their market is so big that their traditional players can suck up all that volume. Look at BYD,
Mhm.
NIO, Xiaopeng, and Tesla's playing pretty well in China, and they have their Giga Shanghai. But it'll be interesting to see how far they drop in China as other OEMs, come online.
So the number one is Model Y. That is the number one
I
number of
had
units.
I had
Mhm.
no idea. That's
Yeah,
wild. And
it's
wasn't it the
wild.
top selling vehicle in Europe as well?
It's top selling vehicle in Europe.
I think the big bottleneck is battery sourcing and battery production.
Mm.
So look at General Motors. They have a backlog of orders for the Hummer. They do. I know we have
Mhm.
one on order. We ordered one.
Yeah.
We wanted to get one and tear one down. Yet they delivered two,
2.
two vehicles in the last quarter. And because of that, it's like, why? You're telling me a multi-billion-dollar organization is having launch issues for a year. They know how to stamp the body panels. They know how to do the castings and the gears and the motors. They've been doing that for years. Frankly, I think they can't scale up their battery production. They just can't. Each vehicle, 200 kilowatt hours, that's like 4 Chevy Bolts worth of batteries. Even if the margin's there, I don't know why they
Mhm.
haven't started delivering the Hummers in earnest. And then they have the Silverado EV scheduled for what? 2024. The Lyric seems very delayed. They're starting with the high cost, high margin vehicles, and they're not producing very many of them. why? It has to be something bigger at play, and I think it's battery production issues in general.
OK, tak nazdar. Baterky. Tesla ako jediná firma donútila celý automobilový trh pohnúť si s tranzíciou na elektromobily. Kvôli úspechom Tesly mnohé automobilky oznámili plány uviesť na trh celé rady nových elektrických modelov svojich aut. Napríklad Volkswagen pred 6 rokmi tvrdil, že do roku 2020 uvedie na trh 20 nových modelov elektromobilov. Tak kde sú? Väčšina automobiliek tvrdí, ako jasne vidí budúcnosť čistého pohonu a ako ju plánuje naplniť. No to, aby sa stala realitou, je už o niečo ťažšie. Môžeš si ju predstaviť ako dokonalý ostrov, na ktorý sa chcú dostať všetci naraz. No na letisku zistia, že na to ani zďaleka nie je dostatok lietadiel. V tomto momente na to jednoducho neexistuje dostatočná kapacita. Takmer nikto sa nepozrel na úplne základnú matematiku. A tí, čo tak spravili, si uvedomili, že je to skutočný problém.
2030 is the target for about 50 to 60% of all vehicles sold being electric. I think that the whole world will only be at 40 million EVs by 2030. 40 million. I think it'll be roughly 50% of global production. I think that Tesla will shoot for the 20 million mark, but ultimately at that point, land anywhere from 40 to 60% of their goal, which would be 8 to 12 million vehicles per year. So I still think the weighting, the amount of vehicles they sell per EV sold will still be in that 20 to 25% range. So I think they'll be selling 8 to 12 million of 40 million, not 20 million of 80. That's my prediction. I think there'll be a weird sub industry that keeps gasoline engine vehicles alive for 50 to 100 years after the death of them.